Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. On Woman tonight, we are going to be discussing television food commercials that are aimed at children, what they are saying, and what effect they are having on both children and their mothers. With me tonight are Joan Gussow, a nutrition educator on the faculty of the program in nutrition at Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City, and Catherine Clancy. Catherine is an assistant professor in the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell University. Welcome to both of you.
Nice to be here.
Joan, is it fair to sell candy to babies?
That's a very good question. I've asked myself that question when I've sat in all sorts of meetings where people have discussed things like, are the commercials honest, or are the commercials telling the truth, or such questions, and I have really speculated that it would be possible to make a commercial which was completely honest, a commercial for sugar, let's say, in which most of the commercials on children's television are, one way or another, and to make a commercial which was totally honest, which gave all the possible hazards. You could say to the kid, gee, your teeth will fall out and you're going to get fat if you eat too much of this stuff, and it would still sell sugar. And if it sold sugar, then I think you have to ask yourself, is it fair to take a food substance, which is probably naturally appealing to children, which we know sweet things are, and push it to children and make problems for their mothers, fighting it off, and encourage them to overconsume it? And I don't think it is. I mean, I think fundamentally the issue comes down to one of whether it's really fair to push at children who don't have the capacity to postpone pleasure, who want immediate gratification. It's one of the things we're trying to teach them to do, and to do that with very sophisticated selling techniques seems to me to be inherently unfair.
Of course, that's the thrust for most of food advertising on television anyway. It seems that I think another question is it fair to push unhealthy food, not the most nutritious food, to the entire public via advertising and via the manufacturers?
Yeah, is it even fair to put it out, I suppose?
Yeah, well, that's got to be the question.
Food commercials in general do that? They're pushing non-nutritional foods and foods that are bad for us? Can you want to make that blanket statement?
Well, there are occasional, if a kid didn't watch only children's television, I think Kate's made this point, and watched adult television, they'd eat a little bit better. Once in a while they'd see a piece of meat and a piece of cheese and some milk and a few other products which were not just candy and soft drinks and sugared cereals and so forth. But fundamentally the economics of the industry are such that in order to advertise a product it has to have a fairly high profit margin. And we all know that the prices of what we call commodity foods, I mean the basic commodities, are going up, and so the most money you can make is not pushing potatoes. The most money you can make is pushing the most highly processed potato product. The further up the line you go, from potatoes to potato chips to potato things made out of pre-cooked potatoes and remolded and so forth, the higher the price per pound gets and the more profit there is, and therefore you can afford to advertise it. You can't afford much to advertise something like a potato. They are being advertised now because all the growers have gotten together and formed a board to advertise them, really to meet the competition. But it's basically, I think John Mayer of Harvard has pointed out that it's the least nutritious products that are advertised most and the most nutritious that are advertised least.
Joan, you said that the whole environment supports bad nutrition.
Well, anyone who walked down the aisle of a supermarket blindfolded and reached out and took something off the shelf every 5 seconds would end up with a basket that wouldn't have an awful lot of food in it. It would have an awful lot of food products. There's a whole environmental support. That's what I think Kate meant when she said the question of fairness is much broader even than commercials. Because if you walk into a little superette, as we call them in New York, a little store in the middle of the city, the thing that'll hit you right in the face is the snack foods and the sodas, and the things that will be right next to the checkout counter will be the candy. And the bakery that wants to sell its products does not usually put whole wheat bread in the window. It puts lemon cream pies in the window. You know, the whole environment pushes bad eating, or let's say dessert eating all the time. I mean, I don't say dessert is bad, but it's for dessert, not for the whole day.
Supermarkets have really changed, haven't they?
Yeah, especially, I guess, in the last 20 years. Dick Manoff points out that 26,000 products in the last, new products in the last 10 years, something like that. Check the
A
figures.
staggering amount. I think it's, yes.
Not all of which succeed. Like maybe a third of them actually stay on the market longer than a year, because the industry is set up that it needs to find new ways of getting profit margins, and that means new ways of processing, and that changes the food just a little, just an iota, enough to make it a new food, and it goes on the market, and it makes it or it doesn't. And of course it makes it or it doesn't partially because of the advertising.
And of course, guess who pays for all those products that fail?
I wonder.
Yeah. Right.
Even the layout of the supermarket has changed somewhat, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, I go way back. I'm not sure I want to confess how far back, but I mean, in 1928 there were about 800 items in the supermarket, and now there are over 10,000 in a large supermarket. And an awful lot of, I mean, it used to be, for instance, when the frozen foods first came in, which I guess was right after or just at the time of World War II, you had a few frozen vegetables. It was a great way to extend the season in which you could eat vegetables that tasted a lot fresher than what was canned. Now, the frozen food cabinet has the frozen vegetables in a very small portion, and there's an awful lot of things like frozen hero sandwiches and snacks and ice cream and fake whipped cream and fake pudding. And I mean, if you really think of the size of the frozen food cabinets and the amount of that space that is devoted to real food is very small.
That's real food. There's certain truths that we've always heard, like for instance that Americans are the best fed people in the history of the world. Is that still true, or was it ever?
I suspect that there was a time, interestingly enough, during the middle of World War II, we had the highest level of available nutrients in the food supply ever, which is interesting to think about, since we all think of that as a time when there were food shortages. What there were shortages of was things like butter and sugar and meat, and so people ate simpler diets and were probably healthier, but they had a lot more, they had a higher intake of certain vitamins, which we're now a little low on. In truth, most doctors, for instance, when questioned, will think that maybe we're maybe fifth. If you ask what is our life expectancy relative to other countries, they'll say maybe we're fifth. The Scandinavian countries maybe are ahead of us, maybe England, although they probably wouldn't think so. Actually, in terms of the life expectancy of the 21-year-old male, we rank, I think it's 37th now in world terms. We're below Greece, Spain, Russia, a number of countries we wouldn't think of. And since a lot of those countries lose more babies than we do, we have a lower infant mortality rate than they have. If you looked at the life expectancy of the 21-year-old male, it would be worse. And a lot of that has to be degenerative disease, because we've wiped out a lot of infections in this country. So we're not so healthy.
Right. Kate, what are some of the messages that you think kids are getting from television?
Well, certainly messages like consume a lot of whatever it is that we're advertising to you.
How do they do that exactly?
In children's television, I'll get back to that, but
Okay.
specifically in children's television, as Joan has pointed out a number of times, they're being pushed to eat a lot of sugar, to pre-sweetened cereals, of course, messages about, I think it's more a question of things that they're not getting. I can't really tell you that they're getting messages to share their food with other kids. You hardly ever see kids together purchasing something. They might be eating something together, but it's like they don't exist with anybody else. Peers never go into a candy store together, for example. There's not very much any relationship that comes out in children's commercials. And they're not being asked to eat what we would call the most nutritious foods, especially in children's television commercials.
Do you have figures on actually how much television children watch and how many commercials they see in that period of time?
Well, at this point, the latest figures we have from the research we've done recently is an average of about 28 hours a week of television.
That's
between
what, 4 hours, about
28
4 hours,
and
yeah.
35
That
hours
sounds
a
about
week.
right.
How many?
Most of the studies come somewhere
Right,
around
right,
that length.
right.
That's about 4 hours a day, if you think about it.
How many commercials per hour are there?
That's just
Yeah,
changing.
that
It went
it's-
from
yeah.
16 to 12 in 72, was it?
Yeah, and then it's going to go to 9.5.
It's just gone to 10.
Yeah.
And it's going to go to 9.5
In another
January
year.
1st of 76.
Right.
That'll take it down to the level of adult television. We're the only country in the world that allows more television commercials to children than to adults. It's incredible.
And that'll be about 18 commercials an hour on children's television. When you first started writing, there were 38. I mean, I think we have to say that things have
38
really
commercials
gotten
an
better.
hour?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now it'll be 18.
And what's really funny is, of course, that they've screamed and kicked and carried on about reducing the number of commercial minutes. But we both read Ad Age, which we find
Yes.
very informational
Yes.
nutritionally.
Right.
And it turns out, of course, what they do is they raise their prices. And there's terrific competition to get the few remaining minutes, so they make just as much money. You know, so that even though the stations say, oh, it'll wipe us out, and, you know, that's not what happens.
And I'm not so sure that the argument about that a child has to see one commercial a lot of times to really get the message. So, I mean, some commercials are good enough. I think the kid gets the message the first time through. I really think that's true.
Do you think television teaches?
Oh, yeah. I think that for a long time there's been an illusion, and certainly you find it in the social sciences literature of the 50s and 60s, saying television, don't go, it's always addressed to academics, and it says, don't go whoring after this medium which looks like it's going to teach, and you have to stand in the classroom and only address 30 people, and this medium reaches thousands. It's not very successful. I mean, they spend millions of dollars to change 1 percentage point of consumption, or we've done these health shows in which we told people the body temperature is 98.6 and they don't remember. Well, this is because academics think teaching consists of teaching people facts. Television's not really a very good medium for teaching facts. It's a terrific medium for teaching attitudes, for teaching people, for modeling behavior for people, for saying to people, if you behave in this way, these are the consequences. And we know from research that one of the things that helps people to add to their behavioral repertoire, to the number of things they know how to do, is to see somebody do it and see what the consequences are going to be, which is one of the reasons it's so terrifying that we have so much violence on television, because we make it much more plausible. You know, it's like if you just have a vague idea what violence is like or what a certain act is like, it sort of has an aura of fear about it, and you probably aren't going to try it. But you see it acted out a few times, and you say, gee, that, particularly with a little, or a little kid where maybe the consequences come at the end of the show and the killing came at the beginning. He doesn't make that connection. He doesn't see that the reason that man is now going to be violently killed at the end of the show is because he violently killed someone at the beginning of the show.
Well, what are some of the negative messages that kids are getting from food commercials? I know you talked about one that interested me, and that was going to the refrigerator. I'll just give you that much.
All
and you
right. Yeah, I think that there's an illusion about selling a particular product which keeps us from asking the right questions. And it occurred to me one time that, probably in reference to one of these studies which said television doesn't change behavior, that it didn't matter whether you were selling Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola or 7-Up or root beer or anything, that the message that was consistent was, when you're thirsty, in America, in the 1970s, you go to the refrigerator and not to the sink. You don't turn on the tap, you open the refrigerator and open a bottle. That message gets really sold. When you're hot, what do? You go to the refrigerator. And I think that there's also a sort of message about the situations in which food is consumed. What sorts of situations is food consumed in? It's consumed on the run, it's consumed in snack form, and so that there's a whole set of pre-sold behaviors, so that if you introduce a new snack food, you no longer have to teach people. I had a fascinating thing happen in a class of mine. The last session, and these are graduate students, the last session everybody brought food, and we had a Christmas party, and it was a kind of, we put it around the tables in the room. It's a big room with movable tables, and we all were walking around trying what everybody else had brought. And there was a guest that somebody had brought from Scandinavia. And he stood at one side and he took some of the food, and the fellow who'd brought him said, "Don't you want to eat?" And he said, "I can't eat standing up." Oh. That was just a revelation to me. I mean, I realized that we've all been programmed to be able to eat standing up. It's not and he was used to sitting down to eat. Now, obviously our children are learning things like that all the time. From the whole all-cross commercials in the medium, there's a whole set of things. You munch while you're playing,
Are kids at all
and riding
skeptical?
merry-go-rounds also.
Kate, do you think kids are at all skeptical about what they see in ads on television?
Well, every research piece that's been done shows that at a certain age, and it depends on who you're looking at, between 9 and 12 at some point, kids on paper become skeptical. They tell you that they don't believe the ads anymore. And all the information we have says that the skepticism is there in terms of their attitudes, but we can't see that their behavior has changed at all in terms of what they're consuming. So, yes, they do become skeptical. Whether that has very much effect on their behavior is not very clear. So, whether it's important to build in...
Maybe they're pre-sold by then. I mean, if they
Possibly,
have tastes
sure.
developed by then, you know, the church says, give me a child until he's 7. Maybe that's what the advertisers can say too.
Oh, I think that's fairly clear. I mean, and the point can be made about, again, the whole American public getting used to convenience foods. Certainly there's a lot of economic and social reasons that that's occurred, and advertising has just, you know, presented the foods and said this is what they are, and presented a lifestyle along with them.
And presented the idea that convenience is a very important value.
Yeah, very important value. Yes.
You know,
Why is everything, almost everything, sweet that's sold to kids?
Probably because it sells. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that a sweet taste is a liking for a sweet taste is built in to humans. Perhaps I've speculated on this, and I don't know whether there must be research that bitter things are often poisonous in nature. I mean, if you think of man as an animal making a selection, you know, going around eating things from nature, the sweet things, the berries, and the things that are sweet, the fruits, are usually not poisonous. Whereas very often a bitter principle, many poisons are bitter. And one could speculate on the descent of man relating to that, or the ascent of man, as you like, relating to that. Mother's milk is very sweet, much sweeter than cow's milk, for instance.
Right.
So that, you know, that's probably a built-in protective device. But what it doesn't protect people against is an industry which is capable of separating nutrition from palatability, which is where we've gotten to now.
Well, it seems like an almost impossible task, you know, for a mother to resist. You know, the child in the supermarket who's running around picking things off the shelves, dropping them into the basket, and you know, she's got to always be saying no to the child. You feel that the role of mothers has changed somewhat, don't you?
As a matter of fact, I do. I think that where mothers once, in a society of scarcity, were the rewarders, that was their role, was to make a life which was somewhat drab or austere palatable by making the cake, you know, making the special occasion. That nowadays the role of a mother is to say no, and that's not a very pleasant role, and we're certainly not training our women for that. I mean, television is really telling them that the only worthwhile thing a mother can have is the adoration and love of her children, and that love comes through being indulgent, which I don't believe. And no mother, because all the other things she has to be happy about are that her floor is shiny and her hair, and so she can't afford to antagonize her children by saying no. I mean, because of the picture that's been painted, and I think she has to.
And the commercial structure for children is specifically set up so that the kids will see the ad and go to a parent and request the product.
Do you think it's made any difference that they now say that they can't make that, they no longer are allowed to say on the commercial, tell
go ask
your
your mother,
right.
or go ask
Do you think
your
that
mother.
makes any difference?
I don't think it's going to make, I don't really think it's going to make any difference. I might be wrong, but I have the impression that that more non-food ads did that anyway.
Yeah.
I think. And it seems to me that especially if advertisers who are conscious of aiming ads at children who are as young as 2 years old, clearly are aware that a 2-year-old, let's say 3 years old with some verbal dexterity, is not going to purchase that product themselves, and the intervening person is going to have to be the parent. Well, you know, we always talk about mothers. I'm somewhat uncomfortable always talking about mothers. It's fathers too, and I think that we should keep that in mind, because I have the feeling from the research that we've done that in situations where the father, you know, not in terms of a role, but just as another adult making the same kind of decisions about the children, backs up the mother's response, hopefully no, that it works better. I mean, it just comes from two different directions rather than one.
And I must say, from just social observation of friends with children, that because the father's often been away all day and hasn't seen what the kid's been eating, when the kid asks for the third helping of something and the mother tries to say no, the father's role very often is to say, oh, I can't see that it's going to hurt him, why not let him have it? So that he's not reinforcing to the behavior that the mother may really be trying to maintain. And she can't afford to antagonize him either, right? He's got to admire her shiny floor and hair.
But the other thing that I think that's critical also in that is, you know, it's probably easier for a mother with one child, husband in a good paying job, maybe herself with a good paying job, pretty highly educated, to arrive at a decision where she feels strong enough to say no a lot of times. A mother with 6 children who are probably watching more television than the kid of the mother who's just got one child is just going to have a lot harder time, and certainly nowhere near the energy level. It takes a great deal of energy to say no. And that's back to the unfairness.
Tell me some specific things that mothers can do, though, to handle this situation. Is there anything else you can do other than say no? Should you explain? Should you try to educate your child?
Well, you know, the advertisers say, well, they can always turn it off.
If you want to have a screaming child,
in the house. I think that one of the things to do is for the mother to be very conscious of what the child is seeing. It is true that a lot of mothers don't know what the kids are seeing on Saturday morning television. It is true also that a lot do. We found out when we've interviewed people. See what the child is seeing, and even that, just doing that, sometimes changes the mother very quickly, because she has no idea. She didn't have an idea of what the pitches were and how strong they were.
Does it help if the mother sits down and watches with the child?
It depends. It really depends, because there seems to be a situation where mothers are sitting down with their children to watch television, but are believing every word right along with the child of what's being said. It's more a question probably of monitoring, or sitting there and playing a very active devil's advocate role against what's going on the screen, and pointing out to the child, you know, that commercial has some really poor nutritional consequences to it. Obviously not in that language, but that product has a lot of sugar in it, and you know what we've told you about sugar. Those kinds of things.
What about all of these sweet cereals that everyone complains about? They're all fortified, right? And they all say that they're very nutritious and all that. I mean, are we not to believe that at all, or what?
I think not. You're not to believe that.
Well, it's half and half, right? The vitamins are there, but so is all that sugar.
And you think one cancels out the other, and really you can't use the excuse or the rationalization that, okay, maybe it's sweet, but it's got vitamins in it.
You know, of course, I guess to play a middle-of-the-road ground here, if that were the only product in a child's total dietary over 24 hours was one serving of a pre-sweetened cereal, you wouldn't be very concerned about it. I mean, I wouldn't be very concerned about it. It's a problem when you find children who are taking more than 50% of their total 24-hour calories from things we call snack foods. Those are the children that you're concerned about. And each of those pieces adds up to more than the sum of the pieces because of the feeling that's conveyed by having so much sweetness pushed all the time.
The Berkeley Cooperative, just yesterday, I guess, because it was, I guess we don't air at the same time as we're doing this, but the Berkeley Cooperative has put out a list of cereals, ranking them on nutritional value. Interesting kind of ranking, because they based
Be careful not to name brands, okay?
No, I'm not going to. But they end up with the pre-sweetened cereals at the end in a lump, because they say they contain way too much sugar, and they're really sugar-coated vitamin pills, and that's really the point. And I was going to say that I'm sure that if anyone wanted to write the Berkeley Cooperative, which they can get to in Berkeley, they could probably get a list of this and an explanation for their ranking. And I think it's probably the best ranking, because what they've essentially said is a cereal should have in it what cereal grains, which is what they're made out of, have in them. It should have some protein and some B vitamins and some iron and some trace minerals and some vitamins, other vitamins. And And it doesn't necessarily have to have in it things which we have abundant supplies of elsewhere, like vitamin A, which we have lots of things which have lots of vitamin A and vitamin C in them, fruits and vegetables, and that's not what a cereal needs to be. And they look at it from a price standpoint, and they rank them by price and by nutritional worth. And it's a very good ranking, and there's no question about it that if you're thinking on a price basis, some of those pre-sweetened cereals are incredibly expensive. And if you consider that the fortification of them, that is the nutrients which are added to them, cost about 7 mils, 7/10 of 1%, 7/10 of a cent, you realize that it's a terrible waste of money just to get a bunch of added vitamins, which if you want your child to have added vitamins, you could get a better balance in a vitamin tablet.
We have less than 2 minutes. What percentage of the total cereals on the market are sugar cereals?
The total sold, apparently about 30% are pre-sweets. I don't know in numbers. There are over 80 different cereals on the market, and I would venture a guess that.
Do we need all those cereals?
I personally have never been able to understand. Well, I know why we have so many. It's the whole novelty value of the new product, which you can then tell the kid, go get this brand new cereal.
One quick question. Is there any correlation between the snacks that the mother eats and the snack that the child eats?
Well, the last study that we did
30 seconds.
showed that there was a very high correlation between the mother's own snack food consumption and that of a junior high school child, which I think points out what I thought that the child would eat what was around.
Yes, I've just been doing a few studies on kids' diets, and what seems to suggest that teenagers eat a lot of anything that's around. So if you have fruit around, they'll eat a lot of that.
Thank you both very much for being here. We're out of time. I've been talking with Joan Gussow and Catherine Clancy on television food commercials for children. See you next week.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.